In our last video, we talked about filling out the mechanical lien form for the general contractor and for the supplier who had a contract directly with the owner. In today's video, we want to talk about filling out the mechanical lien form for the subcontractor and the sub-supplier. Now, the beauty of this system is that both forms, even though they're a little bit different, they contain the same information. So all the hard work that you've done before can be applied to the subcontractor's mechanical lien form, just like it did for the contractor's mechanical lien form. So what I want to do is go quickly over this forms. They're going to be very similar, but I want you to see what this form looks like. And I want to remind you that we have all of our forms in your materials in a PDF and a Word document, so you can easily access those. Again, just like the original or the general contractor, you have to identify the county where the work was performed, and that's ultimately where you'll file your mechanical lien. And basically, it's the same information on the GC or the general contractor form: your name, your address, the name of the contractor who you have a contract with. Now, what's interesting about that, say you're, for example, a third tier contractor or subcontractor, you would still list the name of the contractor that you had a contract with, even though they may be a subcontractor in the project. So you want to list the name of the contractor who you have a contract with in that spot. And then you list the address of the person that you have a contract with, and then the address of the property and the county and the legal description. We won't spend a lot of time going over that because we've done it on the last one. The property is owned by, insert the name of the property owner with the address, that the owner entered into a contract with the contractor who contracted with claimant. This form is designed for a subcontractor who has a contract with the GC. If you're a second or third tier subcontractor or supplier, you would want to then make sure that that language says that the owner entered into a contract with the contractor who entered into a contract with whoever that next tier person is or tier company on down until it gets to you, because you want to always identify all of the players in this project who you've dealt with or who are in line with you between you and the owner. So I just make that notation. In the next paragraph, it says you provided labor or services or materials described as follows. Again, you put in the description of the materials, attach the invoice or contract. Again, you put in the last date of work. Then 90 days, you filed the mechanical lien in the county where the project's located with the amount. And then again, you list whether the property is or is not occupied as a dwelling by owner. And again, just like with the other mechanical lien statement, you attach that pre-lien notice. Again, you attach the amount, you sign in your capacity. Again, and let me state this. If your contract is with someone as a sole proprietor, and again, I don't want to get in necessarily as to the different legal entities, this is something I really encourage you to talk to your attorney about. If you're a sole proprietor, you would just sign your name there, Joe Smith, whoever it is. However, if you are a corporate entity, you would list the name of the corporate entity by Eric Daffern as manager or agent or as president. You want to list the name of the corporate entity signed by you as a representative of that company. Again, you sign the verification that the facts are true and correct. You notarize it. Now, I went through that process very quickly. And again, the reason is because the forms are very similar. They are a little bit different in that you identify who you had a contract with and who they had a contract with up until you get into the owner. But basically, they're the same and they contain the same information. And that's the beauty of this system, is that you can use that one checklist to build the mechanical lien form for the general contractor or the subcontractor. So the reason I didn't spend a lot of time is it's similar in both instances. However, this is what I really want to focus on. This is an affidavit of the subcontractor saying that you've complied with the pre-lien notice statute. If you don't prepare this document or have it incorporated within the mechanical lien itself, and you don't file it with the county clerk, your lien is invalid. So if you're a subcontractor, if you're required to send out a pre-lien notice or to mail a pre-lien notice to the owner and general contractor, and you've complied with all those requirements, you have to prepare this affidavit. Again, you state this, the county where the work was done. You insert the name of the officer or the managing member of the company. If you're a corporate entity, if you're a sole proprietor, you would do it just in your personal name. And the affidavit would make the following statement: that on such and such date, whatever day it is that you sent out the pre-lien notice, in compliance with Title 42 OS Section 142.6, you're the claimant, served a pre-lien notice to the name and address of the original contractor and the name and address of the property owner with their last known address by the description of service and method. Now, like I told you, I 99% of the time send mine certified mail, return receipt requested. There are other alternative means of service, but talk to your lawyer about that and make sure that he or she is in agreement about how you serve that. The certified mail is the way that I go. That's the way I recommend. However, if you can't serve anyone with the certified mail, there are other alternative methods to serve the pre-lien notice. Now, the next paragraph says that the pre-lien notice contained all the information required by statute. A true and correct copy of the served pre-lien notice and proof of service is attached hereto and incorporated herein as if set out in full. And I know that is a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, but you need to have this in there, and you need to attach the pre-lien notice and the proof of service. So slap on the pre-lien notice along with a copy of the green cards, the certified mail return receipt and green cards to that to show proof that you served those. And then, of course, you sign as claimant or affiant, and you have it notarized. Now, that's extremely important. And again, I want to focus on this. I spent less time on the form itself because we went over all the other forms and it's very similar. But this is so important that if you don't prepare this affidavit swearing that you served the pre-lien notice as required by statute, then your lien is invalid. So we want to make sure that we do this. Now, you can do it in different ways. I've seen attorneys incorporate that affidavit within their mechanical lien, or I've seen them prepare a separate affidavit. Our practice is to prepare a separate affidavit. Typically, there's sometimes, under some circumstances, we will incorporate it into the mechanical lien, but generally, you always want to prepare a separate affidavit and attach the pre-lien notice to it. So just remember that that's critical in the process to make sure that when you file a mechanical lien for a subcontractor, that you do the pre-lien notice affidavit. Now, if you have a situation where you're not required to send a pre-lien notice, then it's not required that you file an affidavit saying that you didn't file it. However, I will tell you, and again, I'm just telling you what the rules are, but let me tell you our practices in our office. Again, we send out pre-lien notices. We recommend that we send out pre-lien notices on every job, and we always attach an affidavit to the mechanical lien when we file the mechanical lien. And that way, we've covered all of our bases. We have our belts and suspenders on. We make sure that we've protected your rights and that there's not a gap. Now, another reason that we send out a pre-lien notice and do this affidavit is because sometimes you don't know whether or not the person you're dealing with is actually a contractor or a subcontractor. I'll give you an example. You may have an individual who owns a building and he puts it in one company. It's called a single asset entity. And then he has a separate business that he uses as the tenant, even though it's owned by the same person. The tenant then pays rent to the other entity, and it goes to the same pocket, but you do have separate entities. Then theoretically, that tenant could argue that he didn't own the building, that he's just a tenant of the building owned by the same owner. I know that sounds complicated, but it's a regular way that most real estate investors hold title to real estate, is to have a separate company and own it in a separate company name, and then they rent the building for themselves. So for example, if I owned a building that I officed in, I would put it in a separate entity, and then Daffer & Law Firm would then sign a lease with that separate entity and become the tenant. And then if I engaged in a contractor to do work on my space, then that contract would really be dealing with a tenant and not the owner. Or potentially the tenant could be considered a subcontractor. Now, I know this is confusing, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff in here that maybe I shouldn't, but the reason I say this is I want you to be aware that there's reasons that you may not know whether or not the person you're dealing with is the actual contractor or a subcontractor. And so that's another reason to always send out the pre-lien notices on every job, just to make sure that whether that person who you believe is the owner is actually the owner or maybe a subcontractor. And you just eliminate that risk, you take care of it, you send out your pre-lien notice every time, and you file this affidavit with a subcontractor mechanic lien. Now, the general contractor does not have to do this, only the subcontractor. So when you file a general contractor mechanic lien, all you have to do is file the lien and the exhibits with it. On a subcontractor mechanic lien, if it's required, you need to attach the affidavit. We believe the best practice is to always send out the pre-lien notice and always attach the affidavit. And that way you make sure that nothing fell through the cracks and that your lien rights are protected. So that's all we want to get into in today's video. Again, I'm not going to go over this in great detail because I've hit this very hard about the rules. We've talked about the rules. Just make sure that you get those deep into your memory so that you know when those are. And like I said, in creating your system, I always recommend to make sure you have those diaried in some type of form, whether it's in your Outlook, whether it's on your phone, whether it's in a calendar system. However you want to do that, make sure that you require or that you diary these dates out far enough so that you know when you're getting close to them, and you have a system in place to start the process of preparing the pre-lien notice, the general contractor mechanic lien if you're a general contractor, or the subcontractor mechanic lien and affidavit. So we'll get into the next section on our next video, and I look forward to seeing you.